Welcome to Playful Beginnings, a podcast about the magic of play therapy for therapists, students, and anyone interested. In our podcast, we'll explore the deeper understanding of play therapy and the skills we use when working with children.
We hope to help you understand the why behind what we do and how it helps kids heal and grow. I'm Dr. Christy Opiola, a working play therapist and university professor in North Carolina.
I'm Dr. Maggie Parker, a play therapist and professor in DC. Good morning.
Good morning, Maggie. How are you today?
Oh, it's just a glorious day in Northern Virginia with lots of snow. Yay. But it's a really good day because we have Dr. Hayley Stulmaker here with us, who is a very dear friend from graduate school and also an exceptional researcher and child-centered play therapist. She is the owner of HLS Counseling in Dallas, an excellent researcher, past president of the Association for Child and Adolescent Counseling, and an inaugural member of the Child-Centered Play Therapy International organization. And we have her here to continue the conversation about anxiety and child-centered play therapy. So welcome, Hayley.
Thank you.
Yay.
I'm so happy to be here with you both.
Hey, we're so excited to have you. Oh, Chrissy, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Hayley, will you tell us a little bit about your clinical experience and kind of the type of kiddos you see in your practice?
Sure. So I've been practicing for over 15 years at this point. That number still is, I feel old, but I'm not, but I am. So yeah, so that's kind of part of that. So I really love working with kids with anxiety. That's been my specialty area for a long time. I did my dissertation research on CCPT with kids who are anxious. And that's really, I was excited to be diving into that topic then. And I really continue that in my practice currently. So that's most of the kids that I see are referred because they're experiencing some sort of anxiety. And so that's what I love to do. I really enjoy it. And yeah, that's what I would say about my specialty right now. Yeah.
I'm curious if I can, I know that this was like something that you were interested in and you did your dissertation in it. I'm kind of curious, have you seen any uptick in anxiety with kids, or is it kind of a steady flow since those 15 years? We didn't talk about asking you this question. I'm just curious
Yeah, so I think there is definitely an uptick, and that's lots of news headlines will say that, and research shows that more kids are getting diagnosed. I think lots of kids were anxious before, though, when I was starting to anyway. I think that in some ways there's better awareness around anxiety and how that manifests in younger children. And so I think that we're seeing it. There's research that shows that children are getting diagnosed even earlier and are presenting with anxiety when they're younger. And I think in some ways that's because we just know about it. But I also think the world is more stressful now for kids. I think that they are getting exposed to so much. There's so much pressure all over. There's so much tension in the world, and kids pick up on that. So I think it's kind of both. I think in some ways it's definitely increasing, and we also just know more now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
But tell me a little bit more about, are there general age groups you're seeing that are more anxious? Are all age groups that you cover for CCPT anxious, or, are there hot spots for anxiety? We have both clinicians, but also some parents and teachers who listen. So I think it's helpful for them, to have awareness, because I think sometimes I hear, well, they're too young for that. The pressure isn't here yet. And so I'm just curious from your clinical experience, kind of what you're seeing boots on the ground around anxiety.
So I do think that all ages can really experience anxiety. And I do see that from really little kids. And typically the youngest that I would work with is 3. But I even have parents call me or like, my 2-year-old seems to be doing these things. Then we maybe think they're anxious. Can you do anything about it? Which then I might work more with the parents rather than the child directly in that instance. But definitely young preschool age children, elementary age children for sure. I think that's when people think that comes in. Well, then there's school and there's testing and there's more pressure and peers. So I think that there's kind of a different level of anxiety that comes up in those ages. And then up through, I mean, teens and everything, which we're not here to talk about that, but for sure they have their own unique stressors. So I wouldn't say there's like one age group that definitely seems to be more anxious in my experience, but I do think that it manifests a little bit differently at different ages, and kids can understand it and process it differently at different ages. So I think it just looks different, but that it's there. And so I think that's part of kind of life in some ways. And so, yeah, but definitely those little ones are anxious sometimes too.
And I think it's interesting too, because we're living in a world that is very different than the world that we grew up in. It is so different. And so kind of recognizing that the stressors might be different. Some of the same stressors are still present, right? Mm-hmm. School and friendships and peers, but it's a totally different level based upon, even just social media and technology and the way that it's incorporated into the school and at home and all of these things that I think just as a parent and as a play therapist, it's hard to kind of grasp. Yes, and there's so much different. And so trying to understand the differences in the way society is now, I'm sure.
There is. Yeah. And I feel like I have lots of conversations with parents. And I mean, I'm a parent right now of elementary age kids. And so, I feel this is a lot of the kind of demographic I see is kind of similar as far as age of child and parents similarly to what I'm going through now, and I remember when I was growing up, my parents were like, oh, on AOL Instant Messenger, don't give away any details because people could track you down and find out where you live, right? That was kind of the big scary thing as the internet was coming up and those types of things. But now parents are having to figure out how to navigate kids messaging each other and text messaging and iPads and video games where they can talk to other people. And so they have access to so many more people and different situations and events in the world that we didn't have access to unless we had older siblings or just kind of other inappropriate adults maybe sharing information that kids shouldn't have known or overhearing parents talking about things. And now, parents have so much, I think, more that they have to safeguard for their kids around anxiety. My oldest child is talking about Roblox all the time, which I'm not a huge fan of. And there's tons of reasons why that's the case. And I think a lot of people would support that, but it's still so popular. And I think people just don't understand always the risks that are involved with the things that they are exposing their kids to. And then kids are getting exposed to them at ages that they really shouldn't be exposed to. And then they're having to deal with it. And yeah, that isn't something that we as parents had to go through, most of us, when we were growing up. Times are just so different in that way.
Yeah. It's so crazy. If they don't know the answer to something, we say, Google it. But if they're told something on the bus that's not, we know is not appropriate, but they don't know it's appropriate. And then they Google it. You can't control what the internet spouts out. And so you're right. They're getting exposed even. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like a lot. So it would make sense that you're seeing, that there's high levels of anxiety. And I'm sure there are regional impacts too that play therapists might see, depending on the region you're in, very high stress level of academics or high stress because of poverty and having to have multiple jobs. I'm sure living in certain neighborhoods right now feels really stressful and anxiety producing. So
yes. And I think, and I'm glad that you mentioned kind of both ends of the spectrum. Sometimes I think that there's a focus just on one or the other, but I think kind of regardless of somebody's socioeconomic status or situation that they find themselves in, there are things that are very stressful for children that they're brought up in there. And I think the other thing, at least when you're talking about regionally, also the political climate, and I don't necessarily want to get into politics here, but that's something that really impacts children, the events that are happening, and they're anxiety producing. And, grownups are feeling tension about kind of the different political things that are happening, and children are feeling it too. And they also might have access to the information and know more about what's happening rather than, not, which might be more appropriate depending on the age of the child. So that's, yes. All of those things matter and are important and are impacting kids' levels of anxiety.
Yeah. Well, and not only are they impacting kids, they're impacting parents. And so the environments that they're living in are also stressful, which also can, my guess would be impact the child's level of anxiety too. Because if their parents are also anxious, that can feel contagious at times.
Yeah, well, and it communicates to kids, or the messages I think that kids receive when they're having parents who are anxious or dysregulated or just kind of not feeling settled and grounded, is that then kids are seeing, well, yeah, the world isn't safe and things aren't stable and I'm not okay. And so then, for a kid who already might be feeling anxious to watch their grown-up who's supposed to be like secure and stable also kind of panic in some ways, and maybe not outwardly, but if they're having that internal experience, that definitely can increase kids' levels of anxiety as well.
Yeah. So, Hayley, tell us a little bit about how anxiety is showing up in the playroom,
Sure.
or what you're seeing.
Yeah. So anxiety is kind of an interesting diagnosis or presenting concern, I feel, compared to some others, because it can present in like every way possible, kind of. It's one of those things. It's not, oh, it looks this. If you're, oh, kids are acting out aggressively. Okay, well, that shows up very clearly in certain ways. And that's not how it is with anxiety, that some kids are more kind of externalizing in nature and might be more destructive, more chaotic in their play because they're chaotic in their inner self. And so they're putting that out there as they aren't feeling stable and grounded. Some kids also are more internalizing in how they're expressing their anxiety. And so they're going to organize, everything's going to be put away really perfectly. And I think this is what a lot of people tend to think of when they think about anxiety in the playroom, is this more kind of constricted, contained kind of ways of playing. Like a lot of times anxious kids will make sure everything is set up really perfectly in the playroom. They'll do a lot of kind of sand play, which is regulating and filling up containers and then dumping it back out, and then filling it back up and dumping it back out, kind of that self-soothing type of play. I also see a lot of kids who will change rules a lot so that they can win, because they really need that kind of one up so that they feel more secure. And so that comes up a lot with kids who are anxious too. Maggie, it looks like you have a thought. I can keep going on and on.
Yeah, no, but I think that's really interesting. And it's probably something that I hadn't thought about before. I know I have worked with kids with anxiety, but I think I conceptualized it more as, which is silly, right? This makes so much sense when I'm talking to you, but a lot of kids really struggling in school with performance anxiety and perfectionism. And so they would kind of give up really quickly. But then in this space, they would set these games or challenges, but the rules would shift all of the time, right? So that they could win. And they would create the games. I don't have the games in there. And I hadn't thought about, well, duh, they're anxious.
Yeah.
That track. Thanks, Hayley. Thank you for that insight that I just had. I appreciate you helping me.
Yes. But yeah, and I think that's a nice kind of connection to outside, because a lot of times outside of the playroom, kids can be more perfectionistic, and that can show up in the playroom as well, of like having to make sure that everything is perfect, everything's right. Another thing, though, when talking about changing the rules, sometimes anxious kids are really eager to please the play therapist because they're looking for that acceptance from the play therapist so that they can hopefully feel more accepted within themselves, right? So they're going to look way more to the external, for their sense of who they are. And so they might change games so that I win, and change the rules so that I can do that, so that I'm happy and that then I like them. So there's definitely this dynamic that tends to happen with that as well, that I see a lot with these kiddos.
How do you handle that? Because I've worked with people and they really struggled if children changed the rules of a game. That's not a really. So how do you handle that in that moment? Like, how do you make a reflection that tries to tie those things in?
Yeah. So first of all, because I'm super competitive, perfectionistic, anxiety person over here too, right? So I have to watch my own self. Okay, what's my reaction to that, and what's coming up for me, so that I can make sure that I can kind of own it for myself and then let it go, so then I can be more fully into the child's experience. And then it's really thinking about what is going on for this child in this moment so that I can respond to that. And so sometimes that looks like, oh, you really want me to win, so I'll like you. Sometimes that looks like, oh, you want to make sure you win, you feel good when you win, and things that, so that it's getting at kind of that crux of what's happening for the child in simplistic language. Because also you don't want to be like, oh, well, you must be feeling this external locus of control. And so you want to please me and do all this, right? It's not, it's trying to make it super simple, but in concrete to what they're going through in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really interesting. I think like that point about having to know yourself. I'm also very competitive, which I did not realize. And my husband, are you serious? Like, I had no clue, right? But and then it'll come out sometimes, and then you don't mean it to, and it can be really disruptive to the relationship. Yeah. And so trying to hold yourself and kind of check in within that relationship of, hey, how am I feeling? What's going on with me? How do I put this part aside so that I can focus on the child? And that can be tough.
Yes. Well, it really can, because I know, at least for me, that comes from my own conditions of worth of, well, I have to be perfect in order to be accepted and things of that nature. And so especially if a child is dealing with that, there's that countertransference thing, but it's also just literally in the room as I'm being empathic and really putting all of that on, it taps into that for me really quickly. Whoa, okay. So, well, no, I also have to do this really well. So don't change the rules, because then I can't be successful and win here, right? Because we were here and now we're here. How do I know where to go, right? And it's not about me in that moment. And so, yeah, that's really, it's important to be so intentional about that, to have that awareness for yourself of what that means for you. So just because that's coming up for me in that way doesn't mean that's how it's going to come up for everybody, right? And so figuring out what that would be so that I'm not possibly impacting my relationship with the child by either possibly promoting those further conditions for them or saying, yeah, this is the way to be. This is how I am too. Go ahead, like go for it. But also not letting them really fully express things in the way that they need to. So yeah.
I'm curious. So some of the things that I've noticed recently when working with students and stuff is how kids, especially kids who might be anxious and it could be a multitude of different things. It could be that it's relationship building, but they'll ask the play therapist to draw also. And so I'm kind of curious as to like how you make sense of that, especially when working with anxious children, or if that comes up at all. And then how do you handle that?
Yeah. So it's so hard to answer that in a kind of global way, because with each kid, it's a little bit different. And so the best answer that I can give is it depends. No, that's terrible. I'm not going to actually finish with that.
No, but that's exactly that makes sense. That's okay to say it depends.
But to take it a step further, it really depends on what I think is the child's intention. So for anxious children who are coming in and doing that, are they doing that because they want to compare their work to mine? And so I might respond differently to that if they're trying to see like, how are they leveling up compared to me? Are they asking me to draw next to them because they are trying to connect? And this is the way that they can maybe do it safely because they do feel good about their drawing skills. And that feels something that they can kind of relax into and then actually invite me in. And so I'm going to respond really differently to the child based on what I think that intention is for them. And so, for the first example, I might be a little bit less, not necessarily like willing to do it, but I'm going to be really careful about how I'm drawing and being really attuned to what's going on for the child as I'm doing that, and being really willing to sit in that space where, because I'm a grown-up, I'm not a good artist, but I can draw better than a lot of children because I'm a grown-up, not as they get towards the older ages, but that's might be a part of this. And so looking at that, like, is this also a time where they're doing that because they feel comfortable to fail? So they know that I'm going to be better than them, and that's okay. So I'm going to try to be really attuned to them. What experience are they having, so that I can just be there with them in that. You're feeling really disappointed that yours isn't as good as mine. You want to see if you can beat mine. You can see, or you don't feel as good about yours, but you feel okay with that. Just trying to make responses about what might be happening in those moments.
Yeah. When it seems kind of the games, you have to kind of own yourself, because it can be really easy to get into your own artwork and like lose track of what the child's doing. Because it can be, I don't know, at least for me, I don't know, I can get distracted very easily.
Yeah. And I think that's true for anything that a child asks you to do or to play in, of that you kind of have to do that well enough so that you're in it with them, if you're doing it with them, if that's kind of the direction that the process needs to go. But you also have to make sure that you're not, yes, just getting completely soaked in and realizing I'm doing this not for my own stuff. If I need to go and paint after session, let me go paint after session. But right now I'm just kind of doing it to do it because I'm really here for this child. So yes, that's hugely important to remember.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering, or Chrissy, do you have a question?
No, I was going to take us in a little different direction because something that I've seen coming up more for kiddos that I've been working with is more social anxiety related to either peer relationships or even being in a relationship with me as the therapist in the playroom and the anxiety that kind of presents for them. I might see some of the stuff you're talking about now much later in therapy when we've built a strong base. The initial time is really spent building safety in the playroom and a level of how I've always envisioned it as predictability for them, that I'm going to be the same every time they come and that they don't have to worry about, that I'm going to pull out an activity or direct them or have like a hidden mess or a hidden agenda going on to get them to talk or manipulate or anything like that. So I was just wondering, are you seeing something similar, or do you see kids with social anxiety and how it's presenting in the playroom for you?
Yes, definitely. And a few other things that I know. I'm so saying there's so many things or so many ways that kids can present in the playroom. And so a lot of times for those kids, they're the ones who kind of come in deer in the headlights. They're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's expected of me. I don't know how you're going to respond. How do I respond to you as this grown up who's in this room full of toys? I think it can be very overwhelming for kids who are anxious just in general, but then also with that social anxiety of, well, there's an expectation and you're not telling me how to meet it. I know that I have to be a certain way in relationships, and that's already stressful to me. And so how do I do this when you're just in here, you can do what you want, right? That's a lot for a kid to take in. And so I see them kind of freezing and not really engaging for a while, and definitely kind of doing that, just move the eyes around the room, just literally not being able to move. And then, probably doing more kind of isolating types of play of turning their back to you as they might start engaging. And then kind of carefully looking back and being, are you here? What are you doing? Is this still okay? And figuring that out. And then also trying to, I think because that feels so stressful to them, there's a lot of asking if they're comfortable enough to even ask, but like, how much time do we have left in the playroom? And kind of fixating on the amount of time that they have to tolerate this fairly distressing experience with you, even though you're trying to make it as safe as possible. I think that's definitely something that comes up for these kids quite a lot. And so, well, sorry, Chrissy, it seemed you had a question.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was going to follow up with just a question of, do you ever have kids who can't even make it into the playroom? Because I've had a few supervisees, right, lately who have kiddos who are pretty anxious and just are downright refusing to kind of leave their caregiver. And some of them aren't even willing to leave the car to come into the play therapy space. Just kind of navigating that in itself is a challenge, right? Because practice rules or liability, there's so many things you have to be thoughtful of in those moments. I was just wondering if people respond in that manner too for you.
Oh, yes, definitely. And so I found that for most kids that I work with, the parents can get them at least to like the door of my practice out of the car. I've had the occasional that can't, but most of the time they can get to me. But then once they kind of realize, oh, this is real and this is happening, they're like, no, I really don't. I'm not going to. And, we'll become kind of clingy to the parent and try to hide and be very resistant to coming in. And so I definitely think that that's very common, I guess, within this population. And, I would say that, and there are different ways to handle it. It's kind of, again, not a one size fits all here. And because I know when I was going through graduate school, it was, well, don't ever get the parent in the playroom. You'll never get them out. And then I've heard other people who say, well, you should always bring the parent in for the first session because how else are they going to be comfortable? So now I know that there are a few different kind of philosophies about what this looks like. And for me, it's kind of knowing the family, knowing the parent and caregiver of, can they provide enough security to help get the child in, but then also be able to remove themselves? Can we work that out? What will, how receptive will the parent be? Because I mean, that's a lot of also what you're navigating to. I know Chrissy's the liability and different things. And so, yeah, that's another concern of, do you share a waiting room? Are there other people in there? What does it look? Is the child screaming and flailing versus are they just like huddling quietly in the corner? That there's a lot of things to consider as far as how you might move forward with that. But that's definitely a pretty common manifestation, I think, of anxiety when they're initially trying to come to play therapy. And it can be handled in a lot of different ways. There can be more flexibility, I guess is what I want to get across with that.
Well, and I think that's the nice thing about CCPT, right? Is that there is the ability to use clinical judgment and some flexibility. And I've also heard from some clinicians, right? They need something more than CCPT to address anxiety. So I'd really like to hear from you, looking at CCPT, how it aligns well for children who are anxious in the play therapy space.
Okay, well, I might go off on a rant, so stop me. Like,
Rant
here
away,
I am
girl,
getting
rant
up on
away.
my pedestal here and gonna, on my soapbox and gonna share all of the things. CCPT is so well suited for anxiety for so many reasons. So the first being, that's why it really stopped me. I'll like go on forever. So the first being that, if we're following CCPT, then going back to theory, kind of really diving in. The 6 necessary and sufficient conditions for change by Carl Rogers are kind of what's really fueling this for clinicians. So that second condition is that people, the client or one person in the relationship, so the client in this case, is experiencing anxiety or incongruence. So it's literally right there in the theory of that they're the perfect client, that everything essentially does kind of boil down to that for a lot of presenting concerns just anyway, is that kids are experiencing kind of this internal, like, yeah, something's not right, as compared to maybe how they think things should be or kind of their external experience. And so I think, just inherently in how the theory was constructed and designed and how it's talked about, it's such a good match. So I want to kind of put that part out there first. But the other thing that I think is a huge strength of CCPT and how it's actually enacted, aside from how we're conceptualizing and how it works so nicely in that way, is that the relationship is such a huge part of it and establishing safety. And that's what kids who are anxious really, really need. That's basically what anxiety is this feeling of being unsafe or or that things aren't okay. And that's what CCPT does really, really, really well. That's basically the approach, is to have kids feel they're okay, right, for who they are, that unconditional positive regard, and that they're safe, and that there's consistency, and that there is this relationship that is going to be accepting and understanding and really be there with the child. So I think CCPT really knocks it out of the park in that sense. And as far as, with other interventions, we know based on like research, they work. So we know that this isn't the one way and the only way. My hesitation with doing anything more directive with kids who are anxious, even though it might take longer to be kind of in this more non-directive space, is that if you are pushing an anxious kid to do something beyond what they are ready for, it's not going to work. So if a kid is anxious and you're, well, let's dive in and deal with that anxiety, and they don't have that safety established and they don't feel like they're in a place where they can do it, then they won't be able to. And so again, I think that just really speaks to the wonderful nature that CCPT kind of takes on, or how it works for kids, as it gives them that space so that they can really process through it on their timeline and in ways that feel safe for them. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it sounds, what you're saying is it allows their internal messaging to have an experience different than maybe what they have in other spaces. And then the more that they can trust themselves, the more that, or can trust that experience, then maybe it can be, they can transfer that outside of the play therapy space with someone.
Yes, definitely. And that's a lot of, I think, what happens is that, first, because you're talking about that social anxiety, if that's what's coming up for them, then they get that kind of experience with the play therapist, and they're able to kind of work through those fears and that stress that comes up within those relationships first, and then they can apply that out. And I see that time and time again with kids, and it might not be that direct in that connection of how does what they're doing here actually apply to the specific circumstance outside of the playroom. It might not exactly in that same way, but they can start, as it feels right for them, start kind of leaning into the areas that don't feel as good for them because they have that safety, and then they can start kind of working through that and expose themselves to that in a way that feels right rather than being forced to exposure that might not feel appropriate for them.
Yeah. And at their own pacing and timing. Because I think, again, other interventions work. They just tend to be off of the therapist's spacing and timing instead of, right? So it
Yes,
definitely puts them outside of their comfort zone. And I think CCPT does too.
yes,
It slows the pacing down a little bit.
Yeah, in some cases, kids are kind of ready to go, and they will be in that kind of uncomfortable growing space faster. But that's the thing, is that it is on their terms for what they can determine as their level of tolerance, rather than what we as the therapist would determine for their level of tolerance, which I think is a much more respectful way of going about it, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think it speaks to kind of what we've continued to say, is that we're really trying to foster a deeper connection and understanding, and not just focusing on symptoms, right? It's the process of exploring as a whole person and who you are. And so to come in and address a symptom is very different than to come in and allow a child to experience, and that feels very scary, and then develop and recognize that they have the capacity to do scary things and hard things. And I think, at least sometimes when I hear from students, for instance, the example you were saying, Hayley, of wanting to leave the playroom because this is really uncomfortable. It's, well, see, it didn't work.
Yeah.
It's like, or maybe it is working.
Yes.
Maybe
exactly. That's the work.
That is the work. And
yes.
I'm curious, because I know for myself, when those things happen, right, where they're, I don't like this, I want to go, is it time to go? I might have an internal, my heart rate might go up. I might be like, oh man, I'm really doing bad at this. Maybe I should just let them go. Maybe I'm terrible. I'm kind of curious, how do you handle that with such a strong emphasis and understanding that this is the work?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it comes down to realizing, oh, I'm feeling anxious because X, Y, and Z, right? I'm feeling anxious because I already maybe am not fully bought into this philosophy, and this feels hard. And so I can't sit in this space. It would be easier to just say, let's talk about breathing techniques when you're feeling challenging, which those can be helpful. So again, I'm not saying that that's wrong or bad. It's just, it might be easier to quickly jump to that, or realize, oh, this kid's going to come out and tell their parent how awful it is, and now they won't come back. And am I going to be able to pay my rent next month because they aren't coming back? That there can be a lot of things that can influence the play therapist reaction in that moment. And so being really aware of, what is that for me and what's coming up, or am I failing the child, or am I not providing the conditions fully enough to where this is working? It can be so many things that can cause that kind of panic, or even just because when people are anxious, it feels anxious to be around, that it just might feel kind of go in and rescue and just make it feel better because it feels icky to me. So being aware of what is that about for you, so that you can see, like, do I need to work on this in a more intentional way through consultation, through your own therapy, what might be happening for you? And then how can you, again, kind of see this? And I think something that has helped me stop kind of that panic moment as I'm feeling the panic from the kids is, and again, you aren't really doing this in the playroom, but I kind of think quickly, a half a millisecond of, oh, this is what's supposed to happen. This is how this works. This is the child's level of incongruence coming up pretty big. So I'm here to hold it for them and to be in it with them, even if they're not quite ready to give it to me, right? They might not be in that space yet, but this is the work. And so and a lot of times when I'm working with supervisees and we transition kind of that mindset of, instead of, well, they just want to leave, it's okay, let's talk about why that's happening or what's going on for the child. And then reframing it to, so this is what you're working on. It's just establishing safety so that the kid can stay. Yes, that doesn't feel, oh, but then that's helping them not have nightmares at night, or, troubles going to sleep, or whatever else might be going on for them, or refusing to go to school, or, whatever the outside kind of presenting concern is. It turns into, that's that's what you're doing, is helping establish that safety, which can help them know that that's possible in other areas. And I think that helps a lot too, of just that focus on this is the work. It's where it happens. Yeah.
No, I think it's really helpful on multiple different levels, at least for me. So, yeah, I think it's hard because I do feel bad. Oh, geez. And I think part of it too is, like you said, reminding yourself, and then like the relationship. Is this right now for this child? What do we need in this moment to stay in relationship?
Yes, exactly. And for some kids, it is to kind of back off a little bit or let them leave. Especially if they're so dysregulated, you don't necessarily want to promote that feeling in the playroom that doesn't lead to safety. Or is it, getting closer, getting more, calm, just kind of sitting there, and you might just not say anything, but just be kind of open and available and a calm presence. It can look like a lot of different things, again, just based on what's going on for the child. And especially if this is their first session, you might not know what they necessarily need. And you can just kind of try things out. That's where that level of attunement really comes in. And it's not rapid fire. I'm here for you. I'm trying to, and getting into that flustered space, but of how can I calmly maybe see if I shift my chair over just slightly, how does that maybe impact the child? Or if I'm lowering my voice even more, what does that look like? If I'm not responding as much, how might that go? If I'm responding more, what does that look like? Just kind of being aware of how you're being in this space and how that might be shifting things for the child, kind of constantly doing that assessment process can help in some ways, give you information about, how is this either comforting or not comforting to the child? Not that we're trying to comfort, but just how is this helping establish that relationship and that security for them?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I was also thinking how important it is for us to stay. You talked at the very beginning about this, right? Like being really self-aware, because I think sometimes when kids and with students and with supervisees and myself, I've experienced this myself. I have this all of a sudden rush of wanting to fix or to alleviate the struggle for the child, which then puts me in a state of feeling disorganized or feeling super anxious, right? Where I think now I've learned to lean into that, being, oh, okay, this is the kid really sharing how they're feeling right now. And I now can experience what it's like to be in this little one's body.
Yeah.
Right?
And
using that instead of jumping to, we need to do something else. I need to ask a question. I need to move to an activity, or, sometimes diverting myself outside of CCPT.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to a lot of times, and I noticed this in myself as when I was beginning kind of my counselor development journey. But I see it a lot in supervisees too, is that it's really important for us as the play therapist to increase our window of tolerance. Because if you don't have that and you can't handle a child's intense anxious feelings or intense any feelings or any level of them, it is going to be easier to dive into something that's more concrete because it keeps the feelings out of it in an experiential kind of way. And so, yes, that's huge for us on our side to be able to know kind of where our limits are and constantly work to increase them. Mostly seems to be needed so that we can do that for kids, so we can hold that space for them and be okay still, not be like, oh, now I'm really dysregulated. So that's not helpful either when that happens.
No,
it's a lot. It's really hard being a CCPT therapist.
Yes.
It's really, really hard. And I think that's something that I really try and let people know, is that it takes up a lot of energy and focus. There's so much awareness of yourself and what's going on for your own self and your own body. And then that attunement, this is not just, I feel like sometimes people, I'll be a CCPT because I like relationship. No, it's a lot.
Yeah, it is. It's really heavy work. And yes, I think people don't always understand that. They're like, you're just watching them play or just letting them do what they want. And you just sit there and it's like, oh, no. I mean, yes, I might be sitting in session, maybe, but I'm doing so much emotionally that, especially for some kiddos that I see, it's exhausting. I'm very careful about how I schedule clients. I have that flexibility. I know that I am not like everybody, that I can, have more control over my schedule and be really intentional about that. But I know, because I'm a really strong introvert, that being in this really highly emotional space with high levels of contact is exhausting to me. And so I know that for myself, that I need those kiddos either on a day by themselves or at the end of my day, so that then I don't have to give any more after that when I'm typically depleted, because it is a lot. This is very hard work and amazing work, hard and tiring.
Rewarding for sure.
Yes.
Say honoring. I feel so honored to be a part of their journey.
Yeah.
Well, Christy, were you going to say something, or were you going to?
I went in the same place you were. Go ahead.
Wrapping it up. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you kind of talking with us about this, and look forward to talking with you for our next episode about how you translate this to parents. So thank you so much for being with us. For our listeners, please like and subscribe. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can email us at info@playtherapyspace.com, or Christy@playtherapyspace.com, or Maggie@playtherapyspace.com. And eventually we will check those emails and respond. That's the goal. But we appreciate you being with us today. And thank you, Hayley.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hayley.
Okay.